Hey, how's it going? Rob from Robert Russell Designs. Let me show you how I built this table with this ancient Japanese way of preserving wood, and then with some epoxy on top. Let's go, let me show you. I end up starting every plank table by ripping down the boards and then setting them up for the domino machine to put these loose tenons in it to keep it nice and flat. It gets a little bit difficult sometimes when I use the tight tenon mode. This is the wide tenon mode, of course. I put an awful lot of them in here because when I'm going to burn this panel, I don't want it to warp on me. Getting the beam together that goes through the center of the base to get a whole level of extra stabilization. Now here with the panel, after it's glued up, I rip it to size with my Festool track saw. Again, this thing is a beast, going through 8/4 inch red oak without any problem whatsoever. Sharp blade, powerful motor, gets the job done. Now here I'm flipping the table again. I'm checking out the bottom to make sure it glued up just fine. Love this hoist in the ceiling. I could not have flipped this table by myself without the mechanical help. Now the RO150 sanding down this beautiful panel, just getting the glue off and the marks. Why? Because I'm going to burn this puppy anyway, so it doesn't really matter how level or how flat or how well I sand it. Back to the beam, going to take it through my 15-inch jet planer. This thing is an absolute workhorse. Didn't skip a beat as I'm planing this beam nice and square for the base. I've got to square off the ends as well prior to burning it, and I'm going to burn this beam first. Why am I going to start with the beam? Well, because if I mess things up, it's not that big of a deal. Didn't take a ton of labor to make the beam, but I wanted to get it. But here we go. Do not use a blanket under something you're going to burn with a giant torch. Just a little bit of a recommendation. This burning took an awful long time. I wanted to get a super deep char on it so it was visible after I put the epoxy on it. Here we go, a little bit of slow-mo to show you how deep this char gets. A little bit going through the table to see all the detail. Now the problem when I burned it was the thing warped on me, so I'm going to cut in some C-channels into this panel to pull it down straight again. And these things work beautifully. They hide underneath the table. You'll see those in a little bit. But we go here to the first coat of epoxy. I'm going to put that coat of epoxy on the bottom of the table because you got to seal the bottom of the table and the top of the table in the same way so that moisture as it comes in and out of the piece is consistent. However, I'm only going to put this one coat on the bottom, and you're going to see at the end of the video how I sand off the drips from the top pour and then just seal it with some polyurethane to get the chalkiness away. And here I'm adding a little bit of red flavor to it so that when you look at the table, there's this extra interest of sparkly metallic red in some of those deep crevices that I burned through. I'm popping some of the bubbles here. I ended up doing 4 seal coats on top of this table because it was just so pitted, so rough, and I did not want to screw up the flood coat because there was just so much epoxy on that flood coat. That was me roughing it up, getting ready for that flood coat, and here we go. I mix all of the flood coats by hand. It takes a long time. Every single time I do it, I also make a special paddle with some holes in it to make it easier to mix. And integrates the epoxy more cleanly. I've got 2 buckets here, but what you don't see is I end up mixing the epoxy back and forth between those 2 buckets to make sure it's a consistent mix. Don't want any soft areas after I pour the beast. Pour the epoxy here on the top, spread it with a metal trowel. Now, I used to be worried about using a metal trowel because it would leave scratch marks on the seal coats, but it never has, so I am no longer worried about it. Also use a torch to pop any bubbles. This is me getting the 2 popsicle sticks and pulling out any little tiny inconsistencies that popped up in the table that I can find. Popping those bubbles again, getting them flat. Now I took it off the pour table, I flipped it upside down, and I'm sanding off those pesky drips that always happen no matter what I do. You might have noticed the C channels right there. That's what helped keep it nice and stable. Gonna tape off the edges and put some polyurethane on the bottom to get that chalkiness off after I sanded it. Just a final seal on the bottom of the table. And I'm gonna take you and show you the final look of the table. There's the beam, there is the X-beam legs. Look at the shininess of the top. We're gonna bring you in and take a look at the depth of that char with the red addition to the epoxy. I love this table. If you did too, make sure to subscribe and rate.